So our group of Kara, Aslan, Molly, and Serena are presenting on the evolution of strong Black female leaders, kind of a timeline of different strong Black female political leaders, how they've impacted the world as we know it, like what their legacy is, etc. And also like a very special thanks to Aslan, who like found this really like awesome theme for our presentation that makes it like very classy, in my opinion. So the influence of Black women in politics. So throughout history, Black women have really served an essential role towards making our country what it is today. They're the backbone of America. So even though a lot of their labor is unacknowledged, even though so much of the work they do is unacknowledged, they really have been essential in influencing social movements and progressing civil rights throughout history as a whole. You see that because of that intersectionality of being Black and being female, that they're not getting properly credited. So today we thought we would take some time out and kind of share what we thought about these Black women and how we can better acknowledge them and their strengths. So here's a kind of a timeline of the leaders that we're going to be presenting on today. So first is Shirley Chisholm, who's the first Black woman to be elected to Congress, who was born in 1924. Then Charlene Mitchell, from 1930 to 2007. Audre Lorde, who was a Black feminist, lesbian, poet, mother, and general warrior from 1932 to 1999. And lastly, ending with kind of a current note of Kamala Harris, who is the current Vice President of the United States of America and really is a culmination of all of the work that these different women have done towards making the United States further their progression and views towards the civil rights movement. So first off is Shirley Chisholm. So born in 1924, Shirley Chisholm unfortunately passed away in 2005, but that was following a lifetime of groundbreaking work and advocacy that she accomplished throughout her life. So she is very essential in that she was really representing a lot of Black and female interests within Congress. In the 1950s, she first became involved in politics, and by the 60s, she had become the first Black woman ever elected to Congress. Literally groundbreaking. When she was in Congress, she was working to expand programs for the poor and generally and genuinely advocating for the needs of her constituents, no matter what the color of their skin or their gender might be. She really was an advocate for everybody. Then in the 1970s, she became the first Black major party presidential candidate, as well as I think one of the first female presidential candidates as well. Again, breaking the glass ceiling, tearing down the barriers that would normally keep people from participating politically. But during her presidential candidate, she experienced a lot of struggles because of her intersectionality, because she was both female and Black. So she talked a lot about sexism amongst Black politicians, who for many, the idea of her being Black was okay, but the fact that she was a woman meant that someone else should be spearheading the Black civil rights movement. So throughout her life, there were a few main areas of focus. First, in women in politics, she noticed that there was a huge division in feminism in the 1950s. White feminism was the dominant culture. You would see that most of the feminist movement was led by white women specifically. So as such, she also noticed that a lot of these issues pertaining to women weren't being taken seriously. So she began advocating on early education and childcare, these issues that would help free up women into the workforce, help free up their lives, and give them more autonomy, both political and otherwise. So that's kind of how she got her political start, was advocating for these issues that pertained to the women in her community. And then later on, she became more and more of an advocate for African Americans in politics. So she was actually someone who helped elect the first Black judge in Brooklyn. She was a trendsetter. Because there was so little representation back then, she was oftentimes like the first Black person in predominantly white clubs. But throughout all of this, she continued rallying for civil rights and doing a lot of very important work in the community to make different areas more accessible to people of all different backgrounds. And as I kind of mentioned before, intersectionality also played a huge role for her. Liberal groups at the time were very divided, as honestly they still are. A lot of people thought that because she was Black, she wouldn't be a good advocate for the women's rights movement, or because she was a woman, she wouldn't be a good advocate for the Black rights movement. She was seen as being too progressive. The intersectionality of her different identities was what set her apart, and for many people, they viewed that as a bad thing. As such, she faced a lot of alienation throughout her political career. A lot of people who really should have been supporting her, like the prominent Black political leaders, like prominent feminist ones, would want nothing to do with her because of her intersectionality. So when she ran her presidential campaign in the 60s or 70s, that was really monumental. It gave her a lot of recognition for the work that she'd done, and it gave her a platform. And in the end, how far she got with that, it really proved that anybody can do anything and that it shouldn't be limiting to be one way or the other. A really prominent quote that Shirley Chisholm said that stuck out to me is, quote, "I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman, and equally proud of that. I am the candidate of the people, and my presence before you symbolizes a new era in American political history." And part of the reason that this quotation really stands out is because of the resounding truth. The way that intersectionality for Black women plays out is that they can't just advocate for one subset of their identity. They have to advocate for both. And because of that, they also are often going to be more adept to the different problems different groups and communities face because they see more of that. So a lot of that really made Shirley Chisholm just like the best candidate, the best advocate for a lot of these issues that the people could have hoped for. So Shirley Chisholm left behind a great legacy, quote, "unbought and unbossed." Shirley Chisholm broke the glass ceiling and showed the world the capabilities of Black women in the fight for equality, and really just resounded that fact that everyone has a place in politics and that everyone's needs should be represented. And throughout her career, she always was a huge proponent of advocating for people's needs and for people's rights, no matter who they might be or whether or not she agreed with them or their politics.
Okay, the Black woman that I chose to do who's involved in politics is Charlene Mitchell, and she lived from 1930 to 2007. So I said that Charlene is very much part of the political advocacy movement. So Charlene was part of the political movement and was one of the Black women who paved the way for where Black women are now, and so that people like Kamala Harris can be in positions that they are in now. And she was specifically part of the communist movement also, and she believed strongly in communism. And I would say she was also part of the anti-racist movement, and she strongly cared for Black lives and was always advocating for them. So for her presidential campaign, which I think is what she is most known for, Charlene ran for president as a member of the Communist Party in 1968, and she was the first Black woman to be nominated as a presidential candidate and then to run for president. So no Black woman had even been nominated before her. She believes strongly in communism, and with that, making sure the country is providing everyone, especially Black people, with what they need. So some things she mentioned is good education and supporting Black power and making sure that Black people have resources to get the most out of their experience being alive, basically. Her aims included fighting for racial and economic justice. Charlene didn't have a lot of support in her campaign, as I'm assuming people can guess, being the first Black woman running for president. She did not have support like her white male components would have. So she did a lot of her campaigning on her own and getting her voice out there. She did very much by herself. She ended up on ballots in 2 states. And the reason she ended up only in 2 states is because for some states, she didn't get enough votes to be able to put on their ballots. And at the time, for another reason, people could refuse to put communist members and communist candidates on their ballots if they didn't want to. So she ended up receiving 1,075 votes nationally. And so for Charlene's early activism, she got seriously involved into activism as a young teen. And at 13, this is when she first got immersed into activism and being part of that community when she talks about it in interviews. So at 13, her and other teens protested and held a sit-in at the Windsor Theater in Chicago because of their segregation against Black people and not allowing them to sit in the same spot as white people. So they protested against that, and they had about 3 sit-ins. And at the third sit-in, they had a bunch of other people joining them. And then eventually the segregation rules for the theater changed and Black people were no longer being segregated. So I thought that was amazing. And she also established the Youth Communist League USA with other teens who were protesting against the Windsor Theater with her. Then in Charlene's later activism, post her presidential campaign, she was the national coordinator of Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, so CCDS. She held the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression with other USA Communist Party members. In 1998 in Chicago, which is where she lived with her family in her earlier life, she was part of a Black Radical Congress, which was basically like her and around 5 other retired activists. And then in 1994, she was an official observer for the first democratic elections in post-apartheid South Africa and at the Congress of the South African Communist Party. And she talks a lot about how it is important to support African people and not just supporting and making sure we're supporting Black people like throughout the world. She had to return to the US after doing observing for democratic elections in Africa. She had to return to the US for medical reasons, and sadly, she died of a stroke in 2007. So this is my quote that I found. The world is opening up great things for people to do with their hands and their minds, but for the most part, Black children are denied the preparation to take advantage of them. And the reason that I chose this quote, because I feel like it's sadly like still true today, because there's so many like Black children who are in poverty, you know, and they're not getting the resources that they should be and the preparation that other white children are getting. So it's sad that there's so many Black children with so much potential, but they're just not getting the resources and the opportunities to grow. And then talking about Charlene's legacy, I say Charlene has left a legacy as a Black woman doing things that society told her she couldn't do. She's also has a legacy through the groups she was a part of and work she's done to try and make a better life for Black people. And I think she is really inspiring.
Now, the third of our 4 amazing influential Black women is Audre Lorde. She was born in New York in 1934 to 2 immigrant parents and died at the young age of 58 in 1992. Now, Audre Lorde described herself as a Black feminist, lesbian, poet, mother, warrior, in a time when all of those identities were blatantly targeted and oppressed. She played an influential role in many movements, all of which were situated in the intersection of feminist theory, critical race theory, and queer theory. And she was a lifelong advocate for all oppressed groups, and again, played a pivotal role in centering the stories of diverse groups. Now, in an early interview, as I was doing tons and tons of research, I came across this interview, and she mentioned that when she was younger, she used to, quote, speak in poetry. And she continued to say that, you know, she would memorize poems. And then when she was asked how she was doing or how she was feeling in that moment, she would recite a specific poem that encapsulated her feelings, just like off the top of her head. If someone asked her, you know, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Instead of responding with, oh, I'm doing great, or, you know, today's not my day, she'd quickly think of a poem that just resembled or related to how she was feeling in that moment and would recite it to that person. So that mentality that she adopted from a very young age prompted her to begin her career in poetry that lasted until the day she died. Now, A Woman Speaks is one of her many, many, many poems that discusses the importance of communication between varying races, genders, and sexualities. And so I just wanted everyone to be able to like hear her speak and how she recites her poetry, because reading it is far different than hearing it. So I'm going to play a moment of her reciting her poem, A Woman Speaks.
The title of this poem is A Woman Speaks. Moon-marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten, but when the sea turns back, it will leave my shape behind. I seek no favor untouched by blood, unrelenting as the curse of love, permanent as my errors or my pride. I do not mix love with pity, nor hate with scorn, and if you would know me, look into the entrails of Uranus, where the restless oceans pound. I do not dwell within my birth, nor my divinities, who am ageless and half-grown, and still seeking my sisters in Dahomey. Witches wear me inside their coiled cloths, as our mothers did, mourning. I have been woman for a long time. Beware my smile. I am treacherous with old magic and the noon's new fury. With all your wide futures promised, I am woman and not white.
You know, I just think that really speaks to who she is as a person and how she chooses to take the art of poetry and use that as a tool to convey how she's feeling, her emotions, her experiences. And that continued later in her life when she published a book of her poems titled The Black Unicorn, which was intentional because she was Black, and unicorn is often referenced to gay or queer culture, and she identified as a lesbian. Now, this piece of literature explores Lord's relationship with womanhood as she provides insight on the interwoven nature of oppression, sexism, African American culture, sexual and spiritual awakening, and race. And this book is just yet another example of how Audre Lorde used poetry to challenge the dominant narrative. And as a result of her invaluable writings that were published throughout her life, she was named New York's Poet Laureate in 1991. Now, her literature is my favorite thing in the entire world, so I had to talk about uses of the erotic is power. This passage was published in 1978, and it explores the relationship between women and their relationship with pleasure. Now, this is particularly important because Lorde's definition of erotic reclaims the term while subsequently prompting women, not only of her time, but of our time, to question their lives. So I wanted to read a portion of this passage to y'all. So, this internal requirement towards excellence, which we learn from the erotic, must not be misconstrued as demanding the impossible from ourselves, nor from others. Such a demand incapacitates everyone in the process, for the erotic is not a question only of what we do. It is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction and completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors bring us closest to that fullness. Now, this section, I think, just really points towards how Lorde wanted women to think about their needs in an environment that we're still in today, where, society tells women that we're expected to give and please men, and that's our only purpose. So this piece of literature was an act of resistance then and is an act of resistance now, not only towards the patriarchy, but also towards the political climate. And one of her most famous quotes that I think really just speaks to who she is, quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Now, this second piece of writing that I wanted to share that she published, actually was only recently published on a large scale in 2018, so many decades after she passed. It is titled "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." And this passage discusses the relevance of intersectionality, as well as the relevance of an abolitionist mentality. So I also wanted to read a section of this passage because I think it is just as impactful. Those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are Black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences and make them strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. Now, this piece of writing, it again just speaks to how she truly was it had such an influence on the women of her time. Not only, the conventional white, thin, blonde women, but also Black women and fat women and disabled women and queer women. And she really challenged them to think about how they were existing in certain spaces and whether they were existing for them or for other people, specifically men. And if they were existing for men, how could they dismantle everything and all of the conditioning that they had been given, and really think about their needs and their healing and their growth. And for that time, and even for our time, that is a huge act of resistance. So I know I mentioned one of her quotes a little while ago, but this quote here is actually one of my favorites from her. So she says, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." And I truly think this quote speaks to her values and just her overall lifestyle. Throughout her entire life, she knew how the world perceived her, yet she still woke up every single day as a Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet, and chose to defy society's expectations and binaries. And that I just think is strength in the purest form. Now, her legacy, not only was she a Black feminist icon, she still is. Her poetry, was the first of many to talk about the truth of being a woman and being gay, and having it be shared on such a wide platform for her time, especially. She dedicated her entire life to defying every oppressive system that was thrown her way, and it definitely was not easy. She definitely faced pushback. And when you put yourself in the limelight, especially being someone who is Black and a woman and a lesbian, you're going to face some negativity. But she still remains a leader of virtually every feminist and racial movement of our time. And she continues to inspire people like me, who are people of color, who are queer, who are questioning the conditioning that their gender has forced upon them. And her legacy will last as long as her writings remain. And I'm thinking that's going to be a very long time.
To better understand the true evolution of strong Black female leaders, it would be super important to include our own Vice President, Kamala Harris, who was born in 1964 to present day. She's 56 and counting. Talking about movements that she was first involved in. So she was part of a sorority group of young Black activists called the Divine Nine. This is a little picture here of her at one of their rallies. And I included a link in here so we can take a look at a little bit more about what the Divine Nine is and what their legacy has entailed.
For more than a century, Black Greek organizations have made their voices heard on college campuses and in communities across the country.
Well, the founders of these organizations, they understood that the pathway forward for us was together.
House Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries joined Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity at the age of 18.
And it really was the first time in my life that anyone of importance and authority suggested to me that they saw some leadership qualities and attributes within me, and it's a moment that I've never forgotten.
Moments like that, shared by many in the Divine Nine, the 9 Black sororities and fraternities that comprise the National Panhellenic Council. Vice President Kamala Harris has been outspoken about the impact her sorority has had on her.
And along the way, you find people who help you become your true self. For me, that was my beloved Alpha Kappa Alpha sisters.
In an election cycle marked by historic firsts, it's hard to ignore the role these organizations have played. Georgia elected its first Black senator, and America sent a Black woman to the White House, both members of the Divine Nine.
When I look at what Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and other members of the Divine Nine are doing now, we're seeing that they are dedicated to voter education, mobilization, and participation. We're also seeing that even during a pandemic, the service never stops.
Groundbreakers and trailblazers have always, in so many different ways, been connected to the Black fraternity and sorority organizations, including the great Shirley Chisholm, who was a proud member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority.
I have always been a catalyst for change.
The founders of these organizations, while they perhaps could never have envisioned that one day we would ascend to the highest levels of power and authority in the land, including within the Congress and now the White House, but I certainly know they dreamed it and believed that they were laying a foundation for great things to occur.
But because of my HBCU and Divine Nine family, I know I'm never the only person who looks like me or has had my life experiences.
Even today, we are 113 years after our founding. That is a strong legacy, and we're still able to see the ways in which the United States does not treat all of its citizens equally. Have they gotten better? Definitely. They have definitely improved from where they were 113 years ago. But can they be improved? Also, yes. We are passionate about the same issues within our communities, within the world at large, and we work together in order to achieve common goals. And if that isn't family, I don't know what is.
A family that will remain rooted behind members as they embark on their barrier-breaking journeys.
So that was just a little video explaining what the Divine Nine is and what their legacy has become, really helping with Kamala Harris as she spoke on, that's her first set of like a community. I think that really inspired her to create change through legislation. And so now we're moving on to kind of the main details of her life. At the beginning, she graduated from Howard University, University of California, Hastings College of Law, and she began her political career in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. There, she had to deal with a lot of cases of gang violence, drug trafficking, and sexual abuse, and this all really gained her a thick skin, and people could see that she was very strong and able to stick up for these victims in different cases, and she dealt with the situations really well, and she just gained respect from the whole community. From there, she won the 2016 Senate election and became the second Black woman and first South Asian American to serve in the U.S. Senate, which was a crazy big win for the BIPOC community and women at large. And so far, after that moment, she has just continued to progress in her political career, and it is so awesome to see and learn about everything that she, all the different steps that she took in her life to get where she is now. So, in the middle of her political career, she announced her candidacy in 2015, and she won and became California's Attorney General from 2011 to 2017. In there, she was able to defend the Affordable Care Act in court. She also enforced many environmental laws and was a national leader in the movement for marriage equality. So she supports women, the environment, the LGBTQ community. And in 2017 through to 2021, she served as one of the California state senators. And in that, she advocated for healthcare reform, women's rights, a path to citizenship or undocumented immigrants, a ban on assault weapons, a progressive tax reform. She just kept coming with progressive laws, moving forward and helping the women's rights movement, immigration, dealing with the gun violence that we've been having in America, and tax reform, just like the economy. And it's so amazing to just hear all the different things that she has done. And it really makes me excited for everything that she can now truly do as vice president. And that brings us to present day. Well, on January 20th, 2021, she became the very first female African Asian American Vice President, Joe Biden, as we know. This was a historical moment for so many. And even in that, she decided to wear a white suit to Biden's victory speech, which symbolizes the suffragette white, which just basically means and is a symbol for female empowerment. So I chose this picture here because I just thought it was so cool to see all those women who fought to be able to vote, and then seeing her as vice president and wearing the colors that represent all of those women that fought so hard for her to get to where she is now. I just think that it's so incredible, and that picture really symbolizes how much heartache and what a fight it has been for her to be able to be elected. And so, yeah, and then now she is known as the highest ranking female elected official in American history, which is just phenomenal. I know when I was little, I didn't even know if it was possible for a woman to be a president or vice president. And, I'm just like beyond grateful that in my lifetime I can see not only a woman but a woman of the BIPOC community. I think it really represents change, and is just so empowering to so many people. And additionally, she's the first Black Asian American vice president. And so in that alone, just what an amazing achievement. It is so crazy to see all those pictures of white man vice president after white man vice president, and then seeing her and knowing all the different things that she has done as a powerhouse for change in the past. I'm so excited to see what she will do for the future. And that brings us to a quote that I found of hers that just kind of really resonated with me, and just seeing how she really does stand for women and women's rights. And so I'll read that. It says, "We cannot tolerate a perspective that is about going backward and not understanding women have agency. Women have value. Women have authority to make decisions about their own lives and their own bodies." And that really spoke to me because I know that there's so many people in the legislature, mainly white men, who are trying to make laws about women's bodies, and ultimately that should be up to us and not them. And I just love how she captures so much just in a few lines, and I think that kind of explains her. I think she's very well spoken, and really just clear and knows what she wants and is going to fight for it, and it just makes me so excited to see everything that is to come. That brings me to legacy. Well, as we all know, legacy is kind of just something we can predict at the moment because she is our vice president and that is the present, that's right now. But we can know that her legacy will be tremendous for future generations. I mean, just by being elected as vice president, she truly represents change, as I have mentioned. And just having a Black Asian woman hold one of the highest positions of power in America, that is so phenomenal and inspiring and empowering to women, girls, and the BIPOC community. And so I just wanted to share this little video where she states, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And I think that right there really showcases her predicted legacy. And I thought, who better to really quote that than have a video of herself sharing what she views her legacy will be.
This has been a really meaningful moment for little girls all over the country. And I'm wondering what it means to you to watch how much it means to them.
You know, my mother had many sayings. I say it all the time, but one of them was she would say, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things. Make sure you're not the last. And that's about legacy. That's about creating a pathway. That's about leaving the door more open than it was when you walked in.
And I think that right there just says so much about her character and who she is. And really makes me hopeful for the future, because she's right. Just by opening that door, she is making it more possible for other women and members of the BIPOC community to get into the legislation and hold positions of power just like she is. And I think that is just so inspiring and just really makes me so grateful and hopeful. And now this brings us to our presentation's conclusion. Black women are the backbone of American politics. Just starting with Shirley Chisholm, Charlene Mitchell, Audre Lorde, and Kamala Harris. These are just a few prime examples of Black women who have truly shifted the narrative of America's political climate. At the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality, their work has provided diverse voices and perspectives with a seat at the table. Their existence is an act of resistance. Thank you.